You're listening to Making a Living Show. I'm Roby Levy.
Hi, I'm Paul Bellini, and I make funny things for a living.
Comedy writer Paul Bellini is a 3-time Emmy nominee for his work on Kids in the Hall, and a 3-time Gemini winner for his work on This Hour Has 22 Minutes. He's a prolific film director, a comedy writing teacher, and one half of the 80s gay punk band Mouth Congress. Suffice it to say, this man knows funny. Here's my chat with Paul Bellini. Who are you, and what do you make for a living?
My name is Paul Bellini. I'm a 60-year-old comedy writer living in Toronto. I was a writer on the Kids in the Hall show starting in 1990. I did that for 5 or 6 years, and then I went on to write This Hour's 22 Minutes for 4 years. Lots of other TV shows that have come and gone so fast you've never heard of them. Um, but that's what happens, right, in the business. I also wrote magazine articles. I was a columnist at a magazine called Fab for 11 years. Um, and now I don't get paid so much for writing because I've sort of become a comedy writing instructor at various schools around town. So my active career is a little over in terms of the professional part of it. That said, I still make things constantly. I still write all the time. Um, I just don't get it produced.
That's just like people at the beginning of their career.
Yeah,
They write all the time and they don't get anything produced.
well, because I think if you do it for the love of it, then ultimately it doesn't matter if it earns you money. If there's some way that you can still pay your rent and cover your expenses, and you're driven to do this, you're just going to do it anyway. Um, and writing is something that always calmed me down. I think that for me, it was the most powerful of any kind of drug because it regulates my craziness. It gives me a chance to process my thoughts, to express myself in a way that is very calculated but specific. So I like it for a lot of reasons. I always did. I always thought it was the funnest thing you could do.
And you always did that, like, even as a kid, you were always writing?
Yeah, when you asked me to do this, I had an early memory. I remember my uncle Fred used to babysit me when I was 7, 8 years old. And he'd come over. He was only 10 years older than 7 years older than me. And Freddie wanted to watch the hockey game, and I was not interested in sports. So one day he brought over a bunch of foolscap paper and a box of pencil crayons, and he said, "Make a magazine." And I sat there for 3 hours creating the cover, the ads, the columns, the photos. I literally made a magazine and then I folded it in half and I presented it to him at the end. He goes, "This is very good," and all that stuff. "Look what you did." But I think he realized, oh, God, it's easy to babysit this kid because all he wanted was make junk. I wish I still
Just
had
make a bunch of crap.
just make crap. And the pleasure of creating and saying, "Oh, look what I did," that sort of thing. It's always been there from then.
Did you always know you were going to go professional with all of your creative endeavors? Was that always the drive through high school and then into
Well,
college?
my big ambition as a kid was to escape Timmins because I grew up in a small mining town. It was about 25 to 30,000 people. It was, I always like to say, 400 miles north of sophistication. Um, it literally is 440 miles north of Toronto. And it's a nice place, maybe not so much anymore, but when I was growing up, I have a lot of fond memories of it, but I also knew I needed access to the city, to big libraries, to movie theaters, to events. I needed to be in the action. So I had to get to Toronto. So most of my young life was spent calculating my escape.
And did you think creativity and writing was going to be your savior?
I did by my mid high school years because by then I was involved in yearbook and theater arts. We used to put on a big musical every year. And I was also on grad committee. I was like doing a million things, studying photography. Uh, I was aware of old movies and foreign films at the time. So I was very sophisticated in my tastes. Um, so all of this made me think, yeah, maybe a career in the arts is possible. Originally, I thought journalism because it sounded like it paid well or paid something. But then I started to think, I'm just going to go to film school. And mostly for the reason is that it doesn't exist north of Toronto. There was no institute of higher learning north of Toronto that taught film production. So I chose York University and I made this big announcement. And I was a scholarship baby, right? I had scholarships and stuff. So I announced that I was going to be studying film in Toronto, and everyone went, "Ew, wonderful." And then you can
Bravo.
come back television in Timmins. Like that's what you were supposed to do: return to Timmins with your acquired knowledge and skills. But I was super lucky because one of the first people I met at university was Scott Thompson, who was just completely unhinged, as he is now. It's not a surprise to either of us. You know him. He was completely unhinged, um, but he had the same crazy desire to work as I did, and that's one thing he and I have always shared. We are absolutely driven to create. It's like, again, I think for him, it's the only thing that pacifies him. Not to speak for another person, but I think that it centers us to make things.
You guys met right out of the gates, and did you immediately start making stuff together?
Well, we also one of our best friends was a guy named Brian Hiltz, who was actually a very talented filmmaker and a musician. And Brian would cast us in little Super 8 films and then involve us in his little rock and roll shows. So there was always a performance aspect, and Super 8 was what we shot at the time. And also, Brian was the editor of the college newspaper, the Van Du. So he brought us into that. So all of a sudden, here we are in a position where we were literally writing comedy for a student newspaper, which didn't go over well with everybody else, but we loved it.
Students took themselves very seriously back then as well.
Well, we weren't interested in reporting news. We just wanted, like, we did a feature on the lunch lady, you know. So we had our own take on things, right?
So there you were. You're at York. You met Scott. What were you guys doing scholastically? Like, were you actually taking your scholastics seriously?
Well, I was a film production student, but I was notoriously inept at handling the camera, the sound equipment, the light meter, even the clapboard. So my footage came back, and you were paying $30 for a 3-minute roll of Super 8 film at the time. My footage would come back, and it would look like a brown soup, just awful. So it was obvious that I had no production talent whatsoever. And I was failing at the end of second year, and I was advised to switch into film studies. Now, I was really good at watching movies. I still am. And film studies is, of course, you attend lectures and they talk about, Agnes Varda, and then they show one of her movies, and then you're supposed to write a paper. Like I think we wrote 2 or 3 papers the whole year. My papers always got A's, A pluses. I mean, I was really good. I first of all, I jumped into the research. I would watch the movies, do all the reading, try to come up with my own ideas. I really had a knack for it. So even though I entered film production, which was a Bachelor of Fine Arts, I didn't get that. I got a Bachelor of Arts in film studies. And I was fine with that. But it's a useless degree unless you're going to go into some kind of festival programming or write for a film magazine or teach film. And I couldn't figure out how to do any of those things.
So what happened after school then? Like, did you finished off? How did you wind up going comedy route?
Well, for the first couple of years, you just take any job. I mean, I ran they used to have these kiosks for photography called Suitor Studios. You could drop off your film, and 24 hours later, prints come back. Because we did everything with couriers, rush, rush. So that was their claim to fame, 24-hour service. And you get a second set of prints for free. And mine was in the Christie subway station. So I would go there every day, and I did this for about 5 or 6 months. And all my friends would come and visit me, and we just just talk and make fun and laugh. Like I barely did any work. Then I became an office temp, which I did for a long time because I'm a very fast and accurate typist. So it's good for office work.
Mm-hmm.
Following Scott's career, though, like he started off doing security work,
Right.
but he still had ambitions to be an actor, even though he actually failed. The I think he graduated from university, but I don't think it was in theater performance. Might have been theater studies like me.
Oh,
Uh, but
he was ushered
he was
towards it.
yeah, ushered towards the door. And he joined a comedy troupe called the Love Cats. They were an improv group. They would play a theater, Harborfront every Wednesday night. And I got caught up in the excitement. And that's where he met the other two, Bruce and Mark from Calgary, and Dave and Kevin were in Toronto with Luch Casimiri, was
Right.
another one of them. And Mark put together this little super troupe. So starting in early 1985, I'd already been at a university for 2.5 years of doing these shitty jobs and stuff. All of a sudden, the comedy thing kicks in, and I was instantly attracted to it because the kids in the hall, say what you will, they were five very bright, funny guys. They were
Hmm.
interesting to talk to and to be with, and super creative people. Um, and I liked it because I'd never seen anything like this before. You hang around with rock bands, it's great. Everybody can play an instrument, but you know how dumb some musicians are. They're just hopeless to talk to. If you're not jamming, you are not doing anything, right? But with comedians, the engagement is constant and their observations are constant. So they're really interesting people, like to talk about politics and what's on TV the night before, and weird habits your parents have. Like everything comes into play. So I immediately really liked these guys, and I ingratiated myself, but not as a performer. That's what Scott did, and Scott's a natural performer. He needs that. I'm very awkward on stage. I've done it lots, but I'm not that good. But I found other ways to fit in, usually of doing the posters or working the door or running the soundboard, and mostly videotaping and archiving their shows, which everyone at the time thought I was insane. But in later years proved to be, after they became famous, was quite a good idea because I have documented most of their early years. And you can see their chemistry was instant. It was not something they even worked at very hard. It just sort of came. Super lucky guys, really. Um, and super lucky for me because even at the lowest level, I'm thinking this could be something one day. You know, you never know. Like, because also all your friends have rock bands, and they're all going, "Well, we just recorded a hit single, and oh, we're gonna open for so and so for with those Mo Burke's band, Pursuit of Happiness. We're opening for them." So it's all these, So your rock band friends, you think they might break open too. There's always that possibility. Then you got your actor friends who are going, "Oh, I just auditioned for Canadian Stage, and I've got a Heinz commercial." So when you're that old, everything feels like it's moving forward, and it all feels like anybody could be successful. And the Kids in the Hall weren't instantly successful. They did shows from 1985 to about 1987, for two years before there was serious notice, and the notice that came from like Diane Pauley and Pam Thomas, and later on from Harry Roseman. So all these people started to take interest in them before Lauren Michaels did. And that was exciting. But like I said, I also all my rock band friends are going, "Oh, we're touring and we're so you don't know what's going to break. But being with the comedy guys felt more real to me. It felt more natural because although I never think of myself as a comedian, I am a witty person. I do get a joke. I really understand joke construction. Um, and it's kind of hard for me now to write without wanting to put in a good joke every now and then. When it comes to you, you don't want to waste it. You know what I mean? Um, but I still don't really think of myself as a comedian.
I've always noticed working with you that it's not even just that you have something to say, but you have something to add always.
Mm.
So it's and in seeing you and Scott working together in so many different settings, it's always interesting that it's a pylon. Scott's got something, you've got something on top of it. He's got something, you've got something to add, and it's just sort of this one on top of thing. It's a very brotherly thing. I find it's a creative brotherhood.
Interesting because sometimes that's a competitive aspect to it, in
Well,
that
sure,
you're
like
making
a
each other
brotherhood.
laugh. Yeah, like brotherhood. But I always have. always felt that the final product is the only thing that ultimately matters. That what you put into the making of it, what's important to you, but the only thing that really matters to its audience is the final product. So that's got to be great. It's every you got to put all your good stuff into that final product. The show must come first. And that's always my advice to young people. What's your advice in show business? The show has to come first, not you.
Yeah, and that's something that we've always, you and I have worked together along with my brother Josh, and sometimes with Scott as well, and that sort of mo has always been there. That's something that we always felt we wanted to get from you guys, whether or not we wanted to develop our own voices and develop our own things to say. But one of the things we always took from yourself and from the kids was that the show has to be excellent. It can be weird, it can be demented, it can be strange, it can be offensive, but it has to
Mm,
be excellent. And that's
yeah.
the thing that you have to be hard on, is be hard on the work. Try not to be hard on each other, but if you have to be to get good work, you're hard on each other.
But you know what I think always was important to note was the lack of diva attitudes because no one of the kids in the hall ever became super famous like a Chevy Chase or a Bill Murray famous. Uh, they all did well, but none of them went so far. Well, Foley came close because he anchored a sitcom and a
Right.
major cartoon franchise, but all the same, that imbalance in the chemistry never happened, which I think is a really important thing to know. Canada's good for that. We keep our famous people in check. We don't let them get too much, not too much money, not too much fame. We keep them working.
Keeps their heads from getting so big that they can't fit through the door.
Because we've seen that.
It happens. Yeah. Going back to, whether it's you and Scott in the early days or whether it's you and the rest of the kids coming up with ideas and Luch, where are these ideas coming from? Where do you get inspiration from?
Well, the interesting thing when we started writing comedy was that it seemed to come from several different sources. One thing was Bruce McCullough made it very clear he did not want parody material. So we weren't allowed to do like a Star Trek parody or a commercial parody. Um, and it was always advised to pick your topics. So, like someone like Bruce, he likes white collar work and suburbs. Those are the two things that he seems to focus in on. I think with someone like Kevin, it's about a kind of a status thing because he often feels like he's lower in status than other people, and you know what I mean. Um, with me and Scott, a lot of it was just being gay and coming out and fighting AIDS and discrimination, but finding a funny way to do it, which was really hard because some of that material is so heavy.
Yeah.
But the creation of Buddy Cole, our signature character, was all about finding a delicate voice for harsh realities because we wanted him to say things that Scott couldn't say without being criticized. So we created this character to and gave him voice, as they say, give voice, and it's exactly what that was his purpose, to lessen the blow and to give it a funny little a little twinkle, you know.
Literally and figuratively.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the most interesting things about Buddy was that he was a creation from a long time ago who has maintained relevance because he's exactly that. He's the person who can say absolutely anything.
You
He's
know,
the part of Scott that gets to say whatever the hell he wants, and it's dampened. The harshness is dampened by the fact that it's funny, and yet it's very biting. It's very quick, and it's very direct.
the creation of Buddy is really interesting in terms of the theme of your podcast. So, my sister's boyfriend at the time, Rob Rowett, who was a guitar player in Mouth Congress, had a really nice giant Panasonic camera. It was a big shoulder mount, and then the VHS tapes were on a saddlebag that you wore in your hip. I mean, it just weighed pounds. And he would leave it at the house, and he allowed me to use it. So one day, Scott and I took it out and started videotaping in my room, just letting Scott improvise, look into the camera, and do some improv stuff. And a couple nights earlier, we had been at a party at Brian Hill's place and met a guy named Carl Beauchamp, who's no longer with us. He was an attractive, witty French Canadian boy, but with a really saucy type of humor. Um, really condescending, to be honest, the gay snob. And For some reason, we absorbed that personality thing. And the next day, so as we're doing this little improv, I noticed Scott is actually sort of doing this voice that sounds like Carl. And and at first, Buddy Cole was a vampire who has been around for 900 years and had many lovers in Venice and all this shit. So it was just all over the place. But when we rewatched it, because it was all on videotape, we realized there's a very interesting character here. And he was delicate and wounded at first. And the second time we did it, because we shot it outdoors this time, Scott had to raise his voice. He had to project more, and there was strength coming out of him instead of this sheepishness, right? He had already abandoned the vampire stuff, but he kept all the Arab lovers and all that nonsense. And so it was all about, meeting Serge and all this stuff. All the stuff that went into the first monologue basically was improvised on the porch of the house where I live. And it goes to show you, you sort of sometimes start exploring. And it's like, I think, building a statue and that you chip away until you get to the beautiful statue somewhere inside that marble block, right? And that's what a lot of what we're doing is just like in the dark, like just shooting in the dark, seeing what would happen and where it was taking us. And sometimes a character leads you. You set out writing one thing or doing one thing, and you find the character is pulling you in a different direction. And it's a very strange thing that I've never really been able to quite understand with the creative process. How a fictional thing in your subconscious actually takes on a will of its own and forces the writer or the actor to go in a certain direction without knowing why. And I think that was exactly what happened with Buddy Cole.
Yeah, I mean, there's times I've heard you and Scott talking about Buddy as though he's just in the other room. I mean,
Yeah,
he'd never do that, and we're going to go out next week and go, do something with Buddy. Like it's he's become this human that is part of your lives,
yeah,
and Buddy's written books, and Buddy's gone on tour. I mean, even Thompson's last tour was as Buddy. I mean, he
yeah.
comes out as Buddy, he performs as Buddy, he gets off as Buddy. He may do a take a bow as Scott, but it's a fascinating thing how something like that can take on a life of its own. And it's again, you don't always have to be comfortable with Buddy. Buddy's pretty much there to say the uncomfortable things and do the uncomfortable things.
Yeah.
But he invites you to enjoy that awkwardness right along with him.
But that's an act of creation that is done in tandem. And quite honestly, had Scott and I been working alone, I'm not sure either of us would have come up with that character or understood his function. It was very much of a mutual thing. I mean, he still did most of the work. Let's be honest; he was performing it and doing a lot of the writing, but I was there to kind of make all the right suggestions, I think, and to steer it in a certain way and to sort of focus on certain things. You know what I mean?
What's it like to work with a partner that closely where you're invested, you're a part of it, you're contributing, and yet there's a point at which, as you're saying, Scott takes those things and either does them on stage or doesn't, does them on camera or doesn't, writes in that direction or pushes it in this direction. How does that work between the two of you, knowing that you've got influence and activity up into a point, and then you kind of almost have to take a step back and see what comes of it?
As comedy writers, it's a very simple process. It's making the other person laugh because the laugh is the seal of approval. It's the check mark. So I might come up with 30 ideas in a session, but he only laughs at one of them. That's the one that's going to stay and then find its way into the character or into the monologue or into the script. And it works both ways because he's pitching stuff at me. And when I do my face, "Hmm, that I don't like it face, he knows he can't pursue it. Whereas if I'm laughing my head off, he knows go in that direction. So and it's something that you cannot calculate or there's no control. It just has to happen.
Yeah, that's the essence of a nice creative partnership. My brother and I, similarly, at times when he was taking much more of the creative lead, and at times when I was being a lot more the sounding board. I remember one day he came to me and he had like 50 ideas, and a shocking amount of them were good. but one of them was excellent, and it was the one that he was least excited about and threw away and was just buried in the list of things that he was, really trying to sell me on. But there was this one that just popped out. I said, this one's good, and this one's good. But I can't. You said one line about this one idea, this one thing, and he's like that, and I was like, yeah, I think you got something there. I don't know what it is. And then he took it and just went with it. To his credit, and he wrote an excellent script off of it, and we've had lots of good traction on it. And it's that kind of a thing where sometimes the curation, the sounding board, being that other person, that's just as important, or else you can wind up going down 50 different roads that are good, but maybe not great.
Well, the thing with comedy writing, and I tell all my students this, is that the only real teacher is an audience. I can give you advice, I can make suggestions, I can do this and that, but when you put it in front of an audience and they hate it, it ain't working. And if they're loving it, it's working. It's a very simple thing. Audiences are not invested in your future or your failure, right? All they want is to just be entertained for their money. They're sitting in the room, do something. And so because they have no agenda other than to enjoy themselves, it's the purest form of learning. But when you're just writing in a room by yourself, how do you know?
I guess you start with what you like, and then you got to put it in front of someone else.
I try and make myself laugh, but it doesn't always work, you
It's
know?
like tickling yourself. It doesn't actually happen. You were saying earlier that that you are long since past actively working and stuff, but I'm going to challenge that because you have recently put out a movie, a feature film, and it's based on a band that you and Scott were in 25 years ago.
Yeah.
You're working all the time. You're still making new stuff. What's motivating you to continue to make this stuff?
I think it's that weird legacy thing. You just think about, what do I leave after I'm gone? And I want to leave a lot of stuff to continue to entertain people. That's it. I guess that's it. It's as simple as that.
Well, tell
Oh,
me about Mouth Congress. I mean, what is this thing?
Mouth Congress was like it's like a work project,
Right.
right? In that I wanted to start a band without knowing how to play an instrument, right? And I'm no singer, so I can't do that either. I rented a beatbox from Long and McQuaid back in 1984. They were very primitive. They did about 4 different beats, like salsa and merengue, just awful
Like
stuff.
a Casio keyboard.
Yeah, I think it might have been Casio. It was just ridiculous. And I put it in the basement, hooked it up to an old guitar amp. Like I said, Rob Rowett was there plunking away on guitar, and Scott came over, and the two of us started coming up with song ideas. And I remember our first session, we came up with 30 songs. They're all a minute long, and most of them are obscene. But that's we knew we were onto something right away. And then a year later, we started performing live, and that really stepped it up because all of a sudden now we had to learn songs and create structures and find a show to go with them. Um, and that becomes a whole other thing. This went on for about the better part of 10 years, maybe 6, 7 years. But finally Kids in the Hall came along, and once you start working on a TV show, you don't have time for rock bands. So I buried it all. And over the years, I've always enjoyed those tapes, the videotapes, the audio tapes. And I said to Scott one day, I said, we should do a documentary because no one's going to make it for us. We'll just do it ourselves. We started in 2011. It took that long to get to where we were. But I think, your brother Josh was the one who gave us the idea. He goes, if you're going to do a documentary, it should be about you guys having a reunion show. And
Right.
that was the magic idea because it's one thing to just look back on your crazy archives, and another to give it a framework where you care about those archives because of this framework. And of course, it made for a very fun little movie. And it's really brisk. I just watched it again a few nights ago. My partner George and I watched it. I laughed all the way through it. It's an hour and 7 minutes long, and it's relentless. So I'm very proud of it. We're just trying to find a way to release it. Every film festival it was in was canceled because of COVID-19. Um, our TIFF screening was canceled because of COVID-19. I mean, just we lost every opportunity because of
Yeah.
this virus. So we're still sitting here with something that was shot in 2016, uh, finally completed in 2019, and now just sitting on a shelf waiting. So it's really sad because I hate doing business. I'd rather make another movie than have to do any business.
So, as somebody that hates doing the business, how do you deal with doing the business? Like, how has this worked for you over the years?
Not very well. I'm really bad at promoting my stuff. I kind of lose interest after I'm done making something. I wrote a novel. It took me 10 years to write. I still haven't published it. I sent it out to a bunch of people. There was no interest. Someone said, "Oh, self-published." I went, "That's a great idea," but I haven't done it. Like I'm just lazy to do shit.
This is one of those things that you hear time and again. You have to make the work, but you have to promote the work. You have to distribute the work. You have to do everything now. I mean, yes, we have the means by which to do a lot of this stuff through social media and the Amazons and all that kind of stuff. But man, he's got the time and energy. It's bloody work, and it's hard. You got to be good at it.
It was always the case. I love. I read a book about Oscar Michaud, who was the first big black filmmaker in the 1920s, and he made all these movies. And he would literally take the print and drive all around that Bible Belt area, rent a church basement, and show it. And that's how he would make money. And then go to the next location with a car full of money. You know, that was the only way to do it, was to actually physically show it himself. I'm not going to do that with Mouth Congress. I'm just way too lazy.
We got this internet thing now. Maybe that'll work.
That's true.
Okay, so you're saying that you're no good at promotion. You're no good at the business stuff. But you've
Yeah.
had a lot of success. I mean, you went from Kids in the Hall to This Hour is 22 Minutes. You teach people how to do this bloody thing. Hell, you have Emmy nominations, Gemini nominations. I mean, obviously you know what you're doing.
Not really. I had a good agent when I had an active television career. Um, but no, I mean, I just usually lucked into things. Let's be honest. The reason I've done anything is usually can be traced back to my friendship with Scott, and to an extent, and to someone like Brian Hiltz as well, and then later with Josh. Like I've had good collaborators, and when the work succeeds, it's because we both want to put it forward and figure out a way how. But look how many scripts Josh and I wrote, probably about 10 features, and how many television pitches. And the only one that happened was Locker Room, right? So, you do a lot of work for nothing in this business. And it's hard because when you're creating something, you put 100% of yourself into it. You believe in it, and then you try and make other people believe in it and invest money into the making of it. And that's where it all falls apart. And that's where you start getting things like notes from broadcasters. We did a Buddy Cole cartoon, and one of the broadcasters went, "We love it, except for Buddy Cole." It's like, what? What do you do? What am I like? We didn't know how to. You don't know how to proceed. What are they suggesting? We get rid of our protagonist. The reason we started. It's so crazy. So honestly, I don't know. I would suggest get a good manager or get a good agent. Take every opportunity. Try not to alienate anyone, and pray for the best, because it's like scratch and win lottery tickets. Sometimes you're lucky, most times you're not.
Let's talk about life in general. You said you give 100% to yourself when you're on a show. Do you give 0% of yourself to stuff when you're not? How do you find a balance there?
I'm not even sure what to say in terms of a balance, because it's easy to be consumed by your creations. They take a lot of time and energy. I have a stable relationship and a nice apartment, and I have pursuits. I like to cook. I like to ride my bike. There's things I enjoy that don't involve. Although cooking is an act of creation, but no, mostly I'm just planning the next thing, and I try not to spend money on my projects. Like I discovered a couple of years ago, I could shoot films on my cell phone, because everybody's cell phone is a magnificent camera. The world is full of magnificent cameras now, like never before. We haven't even understood that potential. Everybody's got these amazing cameras. So I shot like 4 feature films. And the reason I wanted to do features was because I thought, what's the point of making short films? No one gives a shit. But if you make a feature, Even if no one's ever watched it, they go, "You made 4 movies that each one lasted about an hour 20?" Yeah, and, I'd hire my former students. I'd ask them, "Do you want a part in this?" And they all wanna work because it's fun. So, I was able to make these movies with $0, and then I cut them myself, and then, we showed them at, this little video store last year, Eyesore Cinema, and it was great fun, to put them on a big screen, with nice audio and everything. But that's it. That's as far as it goes. I can't get them into festivals. I can't. I don't want to put them in online.
Why not online? I'm curious.
Well, I have a YouTube channel, and some of the stuff on it has like 30
Right.
views.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know how to promote it. I can't. I don't know how Lily Singh does it and gets 7 million subscribers. I get 30 views, and that's over 20. That's over 4 years. Um, I don't know. I just don't. I've never known how to promote stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely an art to it, and you have to want to do it. There's no question about it. You have to think of your project as making it as one part of it, promoting it as the other part of it.
Yeah.
And which means you have to really enjoy being online and devoting yourself to generating that type of interest.
My point is, the less money you spend, the less pressure to have it succeed. And if I'm spending 1 or 200 bucks to make my little cell phone features, I don't care if I never make that money back. That's what I would probably spend on drinks with the cast. You know what I mean? So um, it's fine. It's when you start, and we all know people like this who spent like 400,000 dollars of credit debt to make their own feature. I don't want to name names, but several of my friends have done this, and they put them in festivals and blah blah blah, but they still can't sell the damn thing. And what do? You spend the rest of your life just thinking, "Oh, I gotta pay off this fucking credit debt." You know, it must be agonizing. So I did not want to do that. I want to make stuff that costs me nothing.
A lot of people would say, well, if you're not going to put money into your piece, no one's going to put money in. Which yeah,
Exactly so.
which means that ultimately, as you're saying, it's a low bar of entry, but also low expectation. So at the end of the day, though, you're still doing a feature film's worth of work. So what are you getting
Yeah.
from that? What is that? Is that flexing muscle? Is that just feeling good creating? What does that do for you?
Well, it's passing time constructively, I think, because there's something that you're actually working towards that will be finished at some point. I guess it's a sense of accomplishment. It's an improvement of skills because from when I started in January 2018, I shot the first one then, and it was out of frustration because the Mouth Congress movie took me 2.5 years to edit. We did 4 or 5 completely different edits that were not suitable before we found the movie. And I got so frustrated with all that editing, I thought, "I gotta shoot something else. I gotta work on something else." And it became the diversion that paid off, right? I mean, yeah, I'd love for them to make money, but again, I can't see how. So, I'm proud of them, and like I said, that's that sense of accomplishment. "Look, I did it," that sort of thing.
I used to be really hard on projects that I was seeing, Canadian films, let's say, or Canadian television, and I thought, oh man, this is no good. And I couldn't enjoy any part of it because I would just say, I don't know, it's not excellent like some of the stuff I was seeing out of the States or whatever else. And as I got into the business, and had my experiences trying to get stuff made, I realized how bloody hard it is to get anything made, and how it's incredibly impressive that somebody got something made. And even if it is less than perfect, they didn't set out to make something bad. They set out to make something excellent. Everyone does. That's actually the MO of everybody that creates something. You put a canvas in front of you and a bunch of paints, and you're going to try and paint a good painting. Chances are you're not going to. I mean, more likely than not, you're going to make an average or an adequate painting. And certainly when you get more people involved, like in a film, your chances of making something average or just adequate or even bad, they become exponentially higher. So I'm just impressed that half the time when someone can get something made and out the door.
I agree totally, which is why I'm never harsh on my criticisms, even with something I think is terrible, because I know there's no singular author for the terribleness. In fact, sometimes the script that you start off with might be really good, but then a series of compromises made by the producers uh, ruin it, quite simply. That happens more often than not. Um, I always say trust the creative team, but rarely does it happen. I mean, Kids in the Hall were so lucky, and we were an anomaly in that Lauren Michaels set up a show that gave them virtually, I would say, 85% autonomy. We're still having to go within the boundaries of what a network finds acceptable to show. Um, but for the most part, we ignored the notes that we didn't like and made the show that we wanted to make. That just never happened again.
Yeah, all these years later, we've been effectively waiting for the next Kids in the Hall. We've certainly seen some really funny people come along, some good troops and some people with a lot of promise. But it's that autonomy that they had. It's that ability to not take every note and not have it rammed down their throats that made them different and made them cut through.
Sure. It happens sometimes. I think with Citizen Kane, Orson Welles had a sweetheart deal with RKO, and he had a producer who protected him all the way through, made sure he had the best collaborators. And the movie, even as they were shooting it, was controversial, and it was we got to shut this down because Hearst knew it was about him. And they made it anyway, and they made it right. And Orson never had that again. So these things do happen, and when they do happen, they turn out for very great work. Which is not to say that all great work happens this way. Sometimes, again, sometimes it's a terrible script that really talented people find ways to improve. Like Casablanca being a famous example of a script that was being written while they were shooting it. Everyone, everyone on set thinking this is a disaster, it's a bomb, and then it goes on to win Best Picture, becomes incredibly famous. They were actually all surprised by not by its outcome. I think by the end they knew they had a good movie, but by its success because the whole time they're hearing how it's a flop.
Mhm.
So you just don't know how anything's going to turn out. You really don't.
So, what kind of advice would you give to somebody who's looking to start off in comedy, get into the writing game?
Well, grow a thick skin because you're going to need it. The trouble with writing and with comedy in particular is how much of your ego is attached to the final product. You put it all on the line, and nothing's worse than when you write something you think is great and you read it to your friends in the reader's room and they're not laughing, and you think, fuck, I know this is good, but why don't they get it? That sort of thing. But there's a reason why they're not getting it, and it's hard to see. So you have to have a thick skin. You also have to give up any kind of singular ownership, especially with television writing. It's always done in groups. There might be one name on the written by so and so, but you can be sure that every other writer on the show had a crack at that script. So you really have to let it go. If a good idea doesn't work, let it go right away. You cannot get caught up in those sort of things. You have to move forward, and at a certain point, if you're not making money, you got to get out of the business because it will kill you.
So, where can people find out a little bit more about you, Paul?
Um, I have a Facebook page if people want to look it up. It's not that interesting. I don't have a big social media presence. I always say Twitter equals suicide, right? I mean, look, there's the Lana Del Rey thing that just happened a few days ago. Don't tweet. Just don't tweet.
That's the
Because
lesson,
there's
people.
no good can come of it.
Well, thanks so much for being on the show and sharing how you make a living.
Thanks a lot.
Subscribe to Making a Living Show at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and pretty much anywhere else you get your podcasts. Follow along at Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And if you like what you hear, please share the show with someone you know. Making a Living Show is produced by Next Exit Media and hosted by me, Roby Levy. Thanks for listening.